Hi guys, so this is day 2 in the desert testing Ducati's new DesertX Rally. Okay, take 1, over. You excited to see me? Oh yeah. Get in there. So 400 kilometers of dirt, dust, rocks, lumps, bumps, and the Atlas Mountains later, I'm now back in the UK, and I'm going to tell you all about my time on Ducati's DesertX Rally. Before I get into the meat of the trip, I'm going to tell you about the bike. So you've probably heard of the DesertX. What's so special about the DesertX Rally? Well, by comparison, this bike's got longer travel suspension, it's got a sump guard, it's got a higher peak front fender, it's got a taller seat height, different algorithms on the electronics, and it's also kitted with lighter XL rims that are tubed, not tubeless. So we got 2 long days in the saddle, probably around 12 hours solid riding, and I got a real insight into this bike. What you've got here ultimately is an adventure style bike that Ducati have gone and altered to make it more off-road appropriate. And it's important to remember that because this was not a bike that was designed ground up to be an off-road bike first, unlike some of the rivals in its sector. Very early on in the ride, when we were hitting kind of loose trails and rocky fields and whatnot, I started to get a bit of a feel for this machine and realized that, yeah, you know, for that kind of terrain, it was more than up to the job. You could slide around on it, you could hit all the depressions and whatnot, the potholes in the trails that we were riding. For that degree of off-road riding, this thing was ideal. I mean, it's kitted with a 21-inch front, 19-inch rear, so it's got the right size rims on it and everything for that type of terrain, made all the sweeter by that longer travel suspension. In fact, one of the things that I remember first about the ride was just how well the bike rolled over big lumps and bumps. So if you think of like a speed bump in a road about 6 inches tall, this thing, the front end would just plow over that so smoothly, it blew me away. It's one of the smoothest front ends on any off-road adventure bike I've ever ridden. So there were loads of different rider modes on the bike. I went straight to Rally, which is the most off-road focused of all the options. And what that means is that I had no ABS on the rear, limited ABS on the front, and an extremely lessened traction control system at the back, which meant I could have a laugh, light the rear up, and slide this bike around as much as I want, but with a safety net if things did get too out of control. I learned really early on in the ride, 1, I could trust the tech, and 2, this bike could dance when pushed. Fast forward a few hours and we were up on the outskirts of the Atlas Mountains. So what that meant was the pace kind of slowed down a bit. We had loads more dust in our face. You'd kind of be skirting around cliff edges, you know, which were pretty daunting. You know, on a big bike like that, there's a lot of mass. It doesn't take too much effort to wash the front or something like that. So yeah, you know, we were kind of altering the ride and the pace to suit the conditions. But it showed me a different trait to the bike. So I'm going to be honest, what I found was the Ducati was a big, heavy bike. It weighs in at 211 kg, so 1 kg higher than the original DesertX. And that mass sits quite high. And what that means is when you are pushing into a corner, I found that that front end was good, but I was never too far away from kind of locking the front or feeling like I was pushing my luck a little bit. I could have slowed down, I could have took things easier, but what's the point in that? We were there to have a blast and I wanted to get stuck in and enjoy everything that bike had to offer. So yeah, there were times when I was maybe not overwhelmed, especially through the corners with the feel of the front. If anything, if I'm honest, it was a little bit vague. So while it was good at smashing through rocks, I couldn't always get that connection with the front that I was after. And to make things that bit more challenging, because of the mass of this bike and how it sat, it was a little bit awkward to position where I wanted. So most of my weight was going through my pegs to help steer the bike. And by and large, most of the time, I was impressed by how agile the machine was. It was, like I say, just that lack of feel that took time to kind of just learn the ways of the Ducati, really. I think with any bike, especially a big adventure bike, you can't just hop on one and just start blasting around, treating it like a single-cylinder enduro machine. You know, these are big bikes, and the stuff we were doing was big stuff, you know, at big pace, and you know, with that comes big consequence. So you have to build into it. I also learned that this bike was fantastic for just steering and squaring off corners. So, you know, if I really got into trouble, I could just light that rear up in an instant, move the rear end round, point the bike wherever I wanted to go, and away I'd go. I'm not trying to sound heroic, I'm just being honest about the package. That engine has got so much torque, 92 Newton meters of torque, which means you've always got drive in your hand. I mean, I think it makes 110 brake horsepower, but that side of thing is almost negligible. It's all about the torque, and this thing was never lacking. I was also quite impressed at times with, on occasion, you could see maybe about 5 meters in front of you, especially, you know, most of the time I was behind another rider or two, getting big clouds of dust in my face, you know, dirt in my mouth, dirt in my eyes, can't see where you're going, you can't open your visor, you know, whatever. And then you just hit a depression, and the kind of depression that on some bikes would wipe you out. I'm being completely honest about that. Ducati seemed to hold its own, especially the more upright it was, just plow through whatever. And I learned that was a really solid trait to this machine. And it was probably, again, actually a reflection of the fact that it weighs so much, and that front tyre was so good at cutting through stuff that it saved my bacon on loads of occasions. Where the bike really struggled was out in the sand. So when we did get out into the desert, one area in particular, the sand was maybe about 1.5 feet deep, and you'd struggle on any bike. You know, I'm not going to pretend that wouldn't be the case, but especially on a big, heavy adventure bike with lots of power and lots of weight, it felt like the Ducati was quite a handful. I kind of immediately switched to being seated on the bike, leg out, a bit more kind of MX style, because I knew in an instant I'm going to be washing the front.
So just on the chute, deep sand section, absolutely horrible. It's not a bad bike for cutting through, but look at that. It's just so predictable. So easy to wash the front. I hope I haven't just jinxed him into doing that, but that's how it goes.
I had a few dabs, I had a few moments where I thought, yeah, this is going to hurt. Thankfully, never actually came off, but I came close on quite a few occasions. And if I'm honest, I was super pleased to get out of that loose section. Definitely wasn't a perfect bike, and I remember that first night out in the desert, we camped out and I was reflecting on the package and thinking, what are the best bits, what are the worst bits? One of the worst bits was the nature of the engine down low. So again, a big V-twin, loads of torque when you got on the throttle and when you got going, but the initial stage of the throttle pickup was a bit harsh, and also I saw in a few people, it's quite easy for them to stall the bike. I was all the time covering that clutch just to make sure that if it came to, I was guarding that, I could add more revs in and keep momentum. Momentum was so crucial on this bike. So I wasn't a massive fan of the initial throttle pickup or how the bike behaved really low down in the revs. Some big adventure bikes, I'm not going to name names, you can take your hand off the clutch and those machines will pull you around. On this Ducati, that's not something I'd really want to kind of mess around with. I mean, even kind of doing a U-turn in the road, you know, I almost fell foul one time with the bike just stalling on me. And again, adding that huge seat height and the mass, people were on their arse in a second. And another really weird thing about the package was how Ducati had positioned the side stand. So I guess they're wanting ground clearance, they're wanting, you know, everything nice and neat and tidy. But to access it with big, meaty off-road boots on, to deploy it or hook it away, it almost felt like you had to kick the gear selector to get to it, which is never a good thing. So yeah, they're the sides of the bike that I didn't like. But there was so much to like about it. As I said, the electronics were very good. The engine, when it was spinning, was fantastic, dependable, a nice spread of power. I've already mentioned how nice this bike handled, especially through the faster stuff. And in general, it was a very comfortable machine. So even though I was on the pegs for a lot of the rides, sometimes I would sit down in the saddle, hide behind the little dash, nice relaxed riding position. Yeah, it was commendable. I mean, I can imagine a bike like this, if you're wanting to go and just smash big miles anywhere in the world, you're going to be on the road for good sections. And for me, you know, on the small sections of road we did have, I found the riding position nice and relaxed and easygoing. It was, it was pretty accommodating. The technology on the bike, just to hammer home that side of things a bit more, just the switch gears, so familiar to the great switch gears you're going to find on any Ducati right now, on Panigales or Multistraders or whatever. So all very familiar. I guess the big difference was that in front of me was a portrait 5-inch TFT dash, quite easy to navigate. I like the look of it. On the second day of the ride, one of the faster guys in our group, he said to me to try a different setup on the bike. So like I said, I was mainly in rally mode, full power, dynamic throttle delivery, so potent is the only way to describe that. And he said, switch it into enduro and have full power, but with the delivery smooth. And that transformed things. I took traction control off altogether. The bike was so much more predictable, easier to ride, even with traction control off. I could have even more fun with the bike. It just wasn't the brute that it was initially. And so that was a big lesson learned and something I wish I'd have known about on day one, but that's how it goes. I want to quickly talk over the braking performance. So the brakes on this bike, you've got Brembo calipers front and rear. Fantastic power in those front calipers. I mean, too much power for some people. I saw a couple of people wash the front and down they went. And in all honesty, a few times, even though the kind of enduro ABS was engaged, you could still lock the front on this bike. And then there was this panic to kind of get a foot down or whatever, or release the brake and hope that I wasn't going to get down with the bike. But anyway, loads of power from the front. The rear brake was good fun, good bike, good purchase. What I found quite interesting was, unlike on some big adventure bikes, you just lock up the rear wheel in an instant. There's actually quite a bit of progression to the power. So if I wanted to do a slide into a corner, I had to be quite meaningful with the caliper. It wasn't like you just touch it and it locks up, which is good, because actually when we were on some downhill descents, I had that ability to control them using the rear brake rather than just depending all on the full, if the rear brake was just going to lock up or whatever. And I should add on that note as well, another thing that I did find with the electronics was switching the engine brake to level 3, which gave me the most engine braking, and that was something that kind of calmed the Ducati down. It gave me that support I needed, especially when tackling those big descents, especially in the loose desert sand. So that was well worth the tweak. Yeah, that second day was another solid stint in the saddle, and by the end of it, by the time we got back into Marrakesh, I'd really fallen for the Ducati. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's the best adventure bike on the market. There are certain traits to it that, it's just bettered by some of its rivals, but I think as an overall package, it was very good. As already mentioned, Ducati put us in a very tricky environment. The riding conditions were full on, they were harsh. Just being able to see at times was challenge enough. So I think in that respect, the DesertX Rally deserves some commendation for kind of getting me, through those tricky routes and trails with a big smile on my face. It was one hell of an adventure in such a beautiful part of the world, and I'm glad that I had that chance to go and do just that. One thing that's probably worth reflecting on is the difference between this and the DesertX. So the DesertX, as I already said at the start, is your road going machine, but so is this. I mean, arguably, we were there on Pirelli Scorpion Rally tyres, which are kind of more like a sand paddle tyre, but they were great on the road. They're actually probably as good on the road as they were good off-road. And you could do everything you want to do on this bike that maybe you could do on the DesertX. So if you are wanting that access to a whole new world to just go in anywhere you want, whenever you want, that's where the DesertX Rally is going to come to the fore. That's what you're going to get with that. You're going to get more purpose, more access, and the chance to kind of tick off more dream rides. That's what it's all about. It does weigh in at a pretty hefty price tag. So Ducati's priced this bike at £18,995. It's a premium price, but it's also a premium product. And personally, I can't wait to get back out on one.